Watch Dogs Legion is a game that is, at its core, and I rarely say this, fundamentally flawed. The idea to play as anyone can only result in a game where you play as no one. Sure, there are some ways to still deliver an engaging story, but I think with this concept and given what the first two games established, Watch Dogs Legion was starting on the back foot and would need to deliver something truly amazing to rise above the inevitable backlash. But before we can look at the game itself, I want to talk about what the first two games established, as it's critical context for the reception and conception of Watch Dogs Legion. The first thing to note is the tone difference between Watch Dogs 1 and 2. I discussed this shift in tone a lot in my Watch Dogs 2 video. A lot of you didn't see it though, as evidenced by the people who thought the video was ragebait. Because everyone knows the most efficient way to pump out ragebait is to spend nearly 100 hours writing a critique of a game, and given my track record, it's clear I never talk about the things I like. With that in mind, hey! Pay the fuck attention! If you've seen it, then you'll know that I argued that the tone shift in Watch Dogs 2, as well as the gameplay being so radically different compared to the first, despite it being good, led to the series being split in two fan bases, meaning Ubisoft had the choice to please one side, or to try and please both, with the risk of pleasing neither. Watch Dogs Legion is their choice, and I'm sure you can imagine who was pleased here. Let's start where it's easiest. Playing as anybody. Is that what people want? And is that such a radical shift from the previous games? Watch Dogs starred a character that was by all means a blank slate, but not for the character to project themselves onto. Instead, it served as part of Aiden's character. His face is always obscured, his clothing is ordinary, and even his position in our view of the game keeps him comfortably in the peripheral. He needs to blend in because his work demands it. Operating alongside Aiden is DedSec, a group of anonymous hackers that intend on being Chicago's watchdogs. As the game progresses, we learn that there are other DedSec groups all over the world, mostly fighting for the same goal. Characters we encounter have ties to DedSec, their leader is unknown, and generally, the theme is clear. It could be anyone, and that's the power Aiden thrives on. Hacking is an invisible superpower, meaning anyone from a grease monkey bum to a crime warlord can utilize it, and so can Aiden. The second game decided to make Marcus and the rest of the core San Francisco group more expressive. Marcus is even positioned in the middle of the screen, but his and his friends' unique quirks strengthen the theme of the first game. It could be anyone. Sure, those characters can at times be too bombastic, turning the serious tone of DedSec from the first game into a Saturday cartoon, but these people still put on a serious face for DedSec when approaching the public. So fast forward to this new game, and realistically, it could be anyone. The protagonist could be an old woman, a janitor, a fashion influencer. As long as they have a reason to resist, they fit the bill. Legion does this well. Every character you recruit has an event that radicalizes them and justifies their willingness to risk their safety for DedSec. But I think we've missed the other half of the equation. Our two previous protagonists were nobodies, but they weren't no one. To the wider world, they were another face in the crowd, unimportant. But to the people that knew them, to the player, they were people. Playing as literally anyone on paper fulfills the first half of this fantasy. Our protagonist, like any member of DedSec, could be anyone. But once we choose them as part of the team, what do we get? Unfortunately, the same thing. We can't expect Ubisoft to create a unique, in-depth background for every character, and truthfully, their solution is likely the best it could have been. But if the best you could possibly do deprives the player of a proper protagonist, then perhaps the idea itself is flawed. Let's take a look at the average protagonist in Watch Dogs Legion. They have a voice, hobbies, maybe an addiction, a tone, a loadout, and some clothing. The problem is, this is true of the NPCs as well. Once an NPC crosses that line and becomes what is effectively the protagonist, nothing changes. Their backstory is unexplored, their story non-existent, and their tools are all that makes them enticing. But maybe we're interpreting this wrong. What if instead of our player avatar being the person, it's the people? We control the London DedSec faction, and it's only by proxy that we actually control the actions of its individuals. Through that lens, the game becomes more enticing. I collect people like cards in a deck, and the fun comes from achieving DedSec's goals through orchestrating different people, different skill sets, to get the job done. Well, then there's a new issue in the sense that almost every mission is completed by every person. Even worse, when we start looking at these people as not who they are, but what they provide, we dehumanize them, in some ways making them less valuable than a random NPC, and in an instant, we've contradicted the life that Ubisoft always breathes into their worlds. I have a shocking number of British friends, I know, shitty, and whenever I talk to them about Legion, they say a part of them really loves this game because it's set in London, and said city is done so well. And you know what? They're right. For as much as we can criticize the game and even how its mechanics interact with the city, that city is really well made and feels almost as lively as Chicago and San Francisco. I really hate to harp on it, but the strength of this world is hampered hard by glitches that, while not game ruining most of the time, are incredibly immersion breaking. When exploring the city, cars will pop in and out, people will fly across the screen, and in one instance, I was spotted because as I approached an enemy, one showed up out of thin air. The reason Ubisoft's worlds are always so fun is that they are so expertly detailed that I can't help but be immersed in it. And when it comes to Watch Dogs, that is twofold because of the NPCs. But when those NPCs are actively moving across my screen, teleporting around, then they remain NPCs, never becoming people. But that is just the 1%. So let's stay focused on the other 99, because more often than not, London is just as good as San Francisco, and this time has a new twist: surveillance. The game is the dystopian future that the first and second game warned about. Cameras are absolutely everywhere, no one's data is safe, and it gives the world an oppressive feel, selling the idea that a normal person would realistically want to fight back. Checkpoints around the city need to be avoided unless you want to start a chase. Albion guards, if taking a longer look at you, will become suspicious, and sometimes they'll just beat you up. Which you sort of need to let them do, because it's either get arrested by them or engage in a chase that potentially ends your character's life. But Albion isn't the only clan this time around, as Clan Kelly has a monopoly on crime in London. It's a shame that there aren't more factions like there was in San Francisco, but I have to admit the interactions between the two factions still made for entertaining gameplay, even when it hurts sometimes. In one instance, I was infiltrating a base in the open world with a spider bot, but my character was caught in the crossfire between an Albion and Clan Kelly shooting. It almost got me killed, but I was able to sneak into the base on foot while the occupants of said base were coming out to back up their people. Dynamic moments like this were what made London feel alive and reinforced the best feeling of the Watch Dogs series, that you are not special. The world operates independent of the player, leading to many instances where I ran into my fellow DedSec members in the wild, saw an accident on the road, saw someone getting harassed by Albion. The first time I saw it, I intervened, nearly costing my life in the ensuing chase. So when it happened again, I weighed my options and chose to keep walking. I think a perfect testament to London's quality is that as I walked by, seeing the person get arrested for no reason, I felt bad. I felt compelled to help these collages of polygons. Not many games can make me do that. I once again had fun simply people watching. Looking at two people and seeing what they're up to, learning about their backstory, seeing their dirty little secrets. In some cases, they even got annoyed at my incessant staring and shooed me away. If I came across an elite enemy, instead of taking them down, which would make them hate DedSec, I decided instead to go around them, look into them, and bring them onto my team. It's an addictive power, like catching an opposing trainer's Pokemon. So not only can I live in this world, but I can make an impact on people's lives. Now, when that Clan Kelly member enters a restricted area, they try to blend in, and part of their story is how they're a double agent working both for Clan Kelly and DedSec. This was one of the few moments where the game clicked. Watch Dogs Legion is a game that can be quite mediocre at times, and I'd say a lot of it is painfully average, but you'll go through these brief 30-minute windows where the game is living up to its potential, where the different mechanics all fit together just right, and it'll make you understand the potential this game has. It's sad, because when those pieces aren't working together, you know it's possible, barely within reach. Most of the characters I played were just random people. In one case, I rescued a construction worker's sister, and thus they fought for DedSec. It's a pretty simple concept, and I considered it quite boring. But then, this member was kidnapped by Albion, and now I had to break her out. I did so by using a different character who had a trait that caused them to, at any random moment, collapse and die. After recruiting them, I created my own backstory in my head, that this person has a terminal illness, but the doctors won't treat them because CTOS doesn't deem their life valuable enough. So their plan instead is to spend their last days going balls to the wall to take down Albion and CTOS. This headcanon justifies the more aggressive, hands-on approach I took with this character, and it was so much fun. I wish this was the majority of the game, but due to these moments being contained in side content where the story is generally controlled and created by you, that's not the case. The main missions of Watch Dogs Legion have a tough challenge ahead of them. How do we get players to connect with a protagonist that isn't set? One that isn't guaranteed. This is something the developers noted as a potential challenge. In fact, the developers noted a lot of what I mentioned as potential challenges. NPC depth, differing skill sets, tonal inconsistencies, speech inconsistencies, and it begs the potentially rude question: why? Why play as anyone when there are this many challenges, especially when said challenges don't have a clear solution? It seemed like so much needed to be sacrificed in order to uphold the idea that in the end wasn't worth the hassle. I wonder why Ubisoft didn't just let us make our own character, and instead of having different characters with different accents and deliveries, just allow us to choose those in a character creator and then offer dialogue choices within the game so we can choose to be more outgoing like Marcus or play as an Aiden-esque dark and mysterious type. These ideas are already in the game. When you recruit an NPC, you can change nearly everything about them. Hair, piercings, clothing, all of it. Creating your own character would continue the theme of these games, with the protagonist being literally anyone, but without risking them being no one. A character I used plenty in the early game was Baravi Bajwa. She was a construction worker, meaning she had access to certain restricted areas and more importantly, had access to a cargo drone, perfect for achieving some elevation, but otherwise, that's it. And because she never directly showed more than a jovial optimism for DedSec and never got more credit than the group as a whole did despite doing so much, she just felt ignored. Now, I will admit that eventually my goal was to use as much of my team in this playthrough as possible, so I never stuck with anyone for too long, but on a different playthrough, I used the same character for every mission, even customized them to my liking, and still, they just felt like an NPC. Ironically, there was only one time where the interaction between myself and the NPC felt organic, and it was when there were no cutscenes. As I was walking around committing my usual acts of hacktivism, I stumbled across a woman who was handcuffed. I untied them and went on my way, only to be contacted by them and told that because of my kind act, they wanted to help. And boom, I had a new operative. This was another moment where the game's stars aligned. I was having fun, but then it dawned on me exactly why I enjoyed this interaction over the others. And it was because it felt more organic than the usual recruitment cutscenes. There is something so fucking ironic that a game with a central theme of organic life being at odds with emotionless technology needs to rely on a shoddy AI procedurally generated population to half-heartedly achieve its goals. So we've talked about how there's a stupid number of people in this game, all with a stupid number of voices. Surely Ubisoft couldn't afford to hire voice actors for all of them, so their solution was to instead use voice modulation. I think there's a whole video-sized rabbit hole about this, but according to what I could find online, they paid a handful of voice actors and used AI tools to change their tone, pitch, even accent a little, to create the wide collage of voices we find in the game. I'll admit, the selection of voices, accents, everything was super impressive, and is by far the greatest strength of the Play As Anyone system. Except when it isn't. As we've all seen over the last few years with AI, it's not always perfect, and in some cases, it looks straight up bad.
The people are gonna back you, DedSec. And so am I. You can call on me if you think I can be of help. Anytime. Cheers.
Just remember that in case we ever holler you looking for help.
When approaching another NPC, my character's mouth will look distorted, their words sounding more robot than human. And hey, let's talk about the dialogue. Here's the average interaction between two individuals during a recruitment process. Thank character for helping. Acknowledge, offer invite to DedSec. Accept invitation. That is the formula. And while I am not saying they need to get into hyper-specific details, once you see this interaction enough times, the pattern becomes game-breakingly clear. Why is it game-breaking? Because it takes what are supposed to be humans and makes them even more like drones. I understand that using AI is a necessity to achieve Ubisoft's grandiose ambitions, but I again have to wonder at what point are the sacrifices needed to uphold this system too great? The novelty is all that's here. Oh wow, this person sounds like White Light. Ooh, an Indian accent. Very daring. I'm even subtly impressed that there's a considerable amount of British slang mixed in here, but it does make me terrified of a potential Watch Dogs game in Toronto. Wagwan fam, that CTOS tower has been causing my hood bare stress. Crody, could you take that ting down? Okay, I'm sorry, that was so bad. The robotic interactions between characters are one of the leading causes of disconnect within the world. Furthermore, the procedural generation isn't as in-depth as I would have liked. There were countless times that a character would seem to have an archetype. Let's say the resident hacker, which by the way, having a hacker role in a series about hacking is fucking rich, but she was clearly the introverted type. The hood, the selection screen pose, staring straight down at the phone, the clear disdain for fashion trends. So why then would she be posing for selfies? That seems so, personality-wise, contradictory. Sure, humans are complex and we contradict ourselves all the time, but this feels so immensely out of character. Who are they posing for anyways? The internet, you know, where Albion is looking for them? It doesn't matter that much, but actions like these are unfortunate reminders that this isn't a person. This is a mannequin, dressed up in a random selection of clothing and personality traits with no synergy. The worst part is, in spite of all the randomness, all the probabilities, there were still duplicates. There were plenty of times during my playthrough where I would run into a different character that looked exactly like one I already had, or or at times was already using. I understand that this is bound to happen. Hell, in real life, you could come across someone who's dressed the same as you, though it's never happened to me and I live in fucking Vancouver, so it's not like we're lacking density for it. But what this situation does is hurt the illusion. I mentioned this in my videos on the first two games, but the strength of San Francisco and Chicago is that yes, these random NPCs were lifeless technically, but there were enough supplementary details to make believing in their vitality easier. Here, there are situations that make it so much harder. People blip in and out of existence, they find duplicates, they will be a hitman by occupation and yet struggle to take someone down, having no strength or technique compared to the character whose defining trait is being able to down a beer on command. I get it, I've ranted about this system a lot, but I need you to understand, this is the game. Every sacrifice made was in service of this system. Every problem, if you follow the roots, leads back to this system. Watch Dogs Legion is a web of confusion, and at its center is the idea to play as anyone. Normally, I would have suggestions. I don't often criticize without offering a solution. It's never my goal to flat out shit on something without at least offering a better alternative. But I can't. This idea, as proven by the numerous sacrifices that resulted in a system that still doesn't work, is fundamentally flawed and should not have been the basis to create a game around. I rarely say that something fundamentally doesn't work, but in this case, I truly believe it. And as we look at the rest of the game, we'll see why. Remember, this is only looking at the world and how the system interacts with our ability to connect with London. We haven't even talked about the gameplay, story, or what taking back London really feels like. Watch Dogs Legion has a slight problem that a lot of games with oppressive settings have, which is making the game interesting once all the world's problems have been solved. Now, of course, this isn't a big deal. The point of most games is to do exactly that, but it's not quite the case here. Ultimately, the story this time around is about figuring out who Zero Day is and rebuilding DedSec, but fighting the power is often secondary and can be successfully solved before the main missions pick up any steam. The opening of the game does a decent job of setting the stakes. DedSec is framed for setting off bombs all around London, which allows the militia Albion to seize power, creating a city that is at the forefront of Big Brother's surveillance. Drones occupy any view, cameras are everywhere, and the police, Albion, are now as equipped as ever to make life for the average person and DedSec hell. It's clear the goal, at least peripherally, like the first two games, is to take down Bloom, CTOS, and protect the average person. While this was done previously by completing main missions and hacking single CTOS boxes, now we do this by convincing the different boroughs to stand up against the power. This is initially an interesting idea, though its execution leaves a bit to be desired. First, we should start with motivation. Why would we want to liberate London? Why do we care? There's plenty of reasons, with the biggest being that getting around the map and away from Albion in a non-defined borough is consistently tougher than one that has risen up. The most noticeable issue is the checkpoints around the map. Ignoring the fact that you're on an Albion watch list immediately despite just moments ago being contacted by DedSec, if you pass through one of these gates, which are placed at most major junctions or bottlenecks, you'll be given an automatic 2-star wanted level, which early on can be tough to escape from. These checkpoints are initially a pain, but I think they provide an excellent tutorial for the player. When you inevitably speed through one of these, you'll be scrambling to get away from Albion, and you obviously don't run into another checkpoint, so you'll be forced to take back alleys and unorthodox routes away from them. Sometimes this sucked because it meant that I was nearly captured or killed because the only viable escape was through the checkpoints that contained turrets on them. But when slinking through different alleyways and getting around these checkpoints, I realized that while Albion's vehicles are certainly fast, they don't turn very well. If you want to lose the fuzz, the best bet is to make as many sharp turns as possible and not lose them through distance. You can't outrun Big Brother, but to lose them by simply confusing them. This was further drilled into my head by the Albion drones and cars that would spawn out of thin air as I sped down a long road. This was absolute horseshit, but the lesson remained. Take advantage of how claustrophobic London can be. Once a borough is defiant, you'll notice that these checkpoints are shut down, making getting around much easier, and you'll notice that Albion are far less aggressive when hunting you. This makes sense. With the borough defiant, they are spread more thin, and maybe don't have the manpower to operate these checkpoints, and with fewer resources they can as easily track you down. This in itself is a motivation to liberate the boroughs, because it makes life easier for you and makes it appear easier for others. Maybe this is a pure anecdote, and I can't prove if this was intentional, but after making a borough defiant, I noticed less Albion vehicles on the road, less people being arrested for no reason, and less drones in the sky. I truly felt as though I was making an impact on the world, and a lot of the bombastic final pushes for each borough often highlighted a landmark that symbolizes London, and it made me feel like I was actually making a difference. But then we get to the practical side of things, which is, now the fun is kinda gone. I know I'm being such a hater with this, but when you liberate a borough, the checkpoints, Albion's presence, they're all turned down. So what used to be an intense means of traversing the city is now just beelining it to your objective. Once London is free, it dies. This feeling is most noticeable when playing the game under certain circumstances, notably resistance mode with permadeath on. I'm not usually one to advocate for a correct way to play a game, but resistance and permadeath mode are the closest I have felt to a difficulty being intended. I mean, it was in the marketing, your character dies permanently, so surely Ubisoft agrees. Except this mode isn't pushed to the player all that well, and I think many chose not to play with it on, and unfortunately, if you've played permadeath mode, then you'll know why once the game launched, permadeath was swept aside. Resistance mode is a difficulty that can be chosen before starting a new game, and it makes enemies see you easier, you take more damage, deal less damage, Albion is harder to shake, and fast travel is limited. I think this mode is the definitive way to play the game because of two reasons. One, it, through the oppressive gameplay, reinforces the themes of the game, specifically DedSec being hunted, on the back foot, and nearly crushed under the weight of Albion's surveillance. Two, Watch Dogs is a series that has always had a plethora of tools for you to use, and by selecting an unforgiving game mode, you can force yourself to engage with tools that you never used before and think more carefully about encounters. That second reason is also why I was recommended by a friend to play with permadeath on. Now, in an ideal world, that friend was right. This is the ideal way to play the game, except that's assuming the gameplay works consistency or sometimes works at all. This is such a tragic thing to say too, because I think if you don't like Watch Dogs Legion, then playing on this mode would be what brings you around to the game, if its systems were strong enough to handle it. But they aren't. I want to begin by looking at the permadeath function, as of course, considering you have different operatives, it functions less like a one-life game mode, like something we saw in Assassin's Creed Mirage, and more like a Pokemon Nuzlocke. And in that latter case, the reason it works is the same. We collect DedSec operatives like Pokemon, spotting them in the wild and then catching them for use on our team. But there's a twist. If they die, then they're gone forever. Because I myself had to work to recruit these people, and at times customize them, I became slightly attached to them. It's why most Nuzlockes force you to nickname your Pokemon. When you have a connection to your team member and you don't want to lose them, then every interaction has weight, because every mistake could have dire consequences. In resistance mode, since the game was already harder, you can't get away with using your lower skilled recruits because they won't be able to get the job done well enough. So even small tasks can bear a lot of risk, and if you lose, then you lose not just a good asset, but a part of the team, and that loss is often crushing. When I first played Watch Dogs Legion, I played on classic mode with permadeath off, and death was a minor inconvenience. I never cared much about what was happening, and thus barely remembered my playthrough. This time, I felt more tense than I've ever felt playing a Watch Dogs game, and I was more engaged than ever. You know the idea of the first game setup where you can utilize cameras to get a better view of an area before heading in? I often ignored that, because why bother? If I die, I'll just try again. Here, that's not an option. I, more often than not, did whatever I could to utilize hacking to its fullest extent. I engaged with certain mechanics I otherwise never would have, and when it worked, it was damn near perfection. So many of the mechanics here are given new utility thanks to resistance mode. In classic mode, having a Clan Kelly member or an Albion officer on the team was convenient. Here, it's a necessity. When you need to infiltrate an Albion base, you're entering the Lion's Den, and being able to blend with them made me realize that this game, unironically, has the best social stealth in not just the Watch Dogs series, but in the Assassin's Creed series too. I had to plan out a path that let me not get too close to the guards. Hell, some of the characters have actions that aid in your escape, allowing you to blend in too. There are certain get-out-of-jail-free hacks you can use, jamming enemy guns, a watchbound EMP, and these were all tools I basically forgot about when not in resistance mode because I never needed to use them, but here, it was integral to survival, and even the most basic of hacks saved my skin on more than one occasion. On one mission, I had to sneak into an Albion base, and was doing so remotely from the top of an unconstructed bridge. Two guards were coming up to investigate, so I hacked the vehicle next to me, causing it to run over one of the guards, and while the other was distracted, I jumped off the side into my objective. Moments like these, or one where, in order to get out of a sticky situation, I hacked a turret to protect myself, were what made the game, and truthfully, my only complaint was the cooldown time. Every hack this time around is on a lengthy cooldown, and while that did mean that I needed to play a bit more strategically, it also meant that in some of the harder stages where hacks like distractions were a necessity, I was waiting around for the cooldown to finish. It's especially annoying during chases or drone fights. You can only disable a drone, hijack it, or cause it to fight for you so many times, and using guns isn't viable because you die so fast, which led to many moments of frustration. Like, at least cut down the hijack cooldown or allow me to stockpile an extra one. With these added restrictions and with the bigger consequences, most stealth encounters are entire ordeals that go through some obvious steps. Hacking cameras to identify tools within the environment, enemy positions, as well as any entry and exit points. Most strongholds have a secret entrance, either through a roof access vent or through an underground tunnel. Finding these was the perfect reward for being observant, and elevated the feeling of being a hacker super spy. Then there are decisions to enter with the spider bot or your person, either of which are going to have their strengths and weaknesses. Where the spider bot has no means of permanently removing threats, it has the low detectability and high expendability that makes it worthwhile. Often, a combination of both will be needed for success, and generally, the stealth here is really good. Enemies detect you fast, but not too fast, and they investigate sounds and are exceptionally forgiving when alerting other guards. A large issue with stealth in Watch Dogs 2 was that if an enemy spotted you, even dogs, the rest of the base would be instantly alerted to your position. Here, if spotted, you'll probably enter a fistfight with the person who spotted you and anyone nearby, but the game is very forgiving with that range, and even more so if you kite the enemies to a more secluded arena. Seeing this change here made stealth a lot more fun and a lot more forgiving, which is actually a running theme. You can jam enemy guns, cut their comms, distract them, shock them, go invisible for God's sake. There's a lot you can do to give yourself a second chance, and initially, I assumed that this was because the game would be hard. No. These self-saving abilities are simply a band-aid for the real issue, which is the gameplay isn't very consistent. I don't say this lightly. The Watch Dogs Legion gameplay might be genuinely one of the buggiest Ubisoft systems I have ever used. And the fact it was the first one with a permadeath mode would be a really great joke if it wasn't on us. I need to clarify, this next bit is speculation, but I think a large reason the permadeath mode was made toggleable was because during playtesting, their systems were so inconsistent that players could not help themselves but die to some unbelievable shit. Why do I think that? Because it happened to me. A lot. I seriously cannot begin to fathom how so many character-ending issues are in this game, and granted, sometimes I died because of a skill issue. I will gladly admit that. But then there were plenty where I died because not just one, but multiple systems that I am meant to rely on failed. Let's look at one example on a rooftop with what was, at the time, my favorite character. She walks up, turns off a drone, sends a text to the guy in front of her, meaning his vision cone is gone for a moment. Note that our character is unarmed. As I approach and press the X input to do a takedown, indicated by the game instructing me to do so, instead, I punch the enemy, causing me to be detected not just by him, but by the other guard a few feet away. Said other guard instantly pulls out their gun, which is not supposed to happen. Then, I assume because my camera is now facing the guard pumping me full of lead, my character swings in their direction, obviously missing, the guard rolls backwards, and I am shot dead before I have the opportunity to run away, being cock-blocked by the bar instead of vaulting over it. Looking at this clip, we can see 3 different systems that have failed, causing the death of this operative. However, it is also true that I could have acquired the upgrade that lets me jam an enemy's gun sooner. I could have used a spider bot that can't be permanently lost. I could have instantly run away once detected instead of remaining within the fist fight, and lastly, I could have fired back. But the problem is, half of those solutions require me to plan for those systems to fail, when the game has made it abundantly clear that I am not supposed to do that. This is merely the tip of the iceberg. Let's talk about the preventative measures. There are ways to avoid this situation, jamming weapons, disrupting comms, even using the environment to draw the attention of enemies. But the problem is, these are hacks that are purchased from the tech lab. Think about basically any baseline hack you had in the first 2 games. It's now behind an upgrade that is applied to every character. These are less about ways of using the environment to your advantage and more about actually being able to play the game. One of the upgrades, of course, is just letting you take more damage, which already feels out of place, but then there are non-lethal weapons which occupy a quarter of the wall. Then there are drone hacks. A majority of your upgrades will go here because if a riot drone approaches and you don't have a way of disabling it, then it comes down to a numbers game and you will lose that game. Oh, Aqua, just take cover. Yeah, take cover from the drone that can fly right over said cover and shove its gun so far up my ass I am coughing up gunpowder. So a lot of these upgrades are essential. And yes, that does mean that as the game goes on, it gets easier. But not because I was getting better, but because I had enough guardrails to prevent the game from stepping out of line and fucking me. What most disappoints me about the tech tab is that these are upgrades applied to all characters. The aforementioned hooligan, whose defining trait is being able to slam a pint, is now able to remote control any drone just as well as the resident hacker. The getaway driver now takes just as many bullets as the armor-clad Albion soldier. The game feels terrified of making any one character too unique. While yes, I praise the social stealth with certain characters wearing disguises, but that's all we get. Oh, a spy has a silenced weapon. Well, we can upgrade the stun gun to be silenced. Oh, the construction worker can summon a drone. And yeah, so can everyone else if they hack a drone terminal, which is always nearby any objective on the map. This was something Ubisoft was concerned about during development, making sure every character was capable of completing every task. But I feel that this again comes at a heavy cost, because instead of each mission being completed in unique ways, they all feel so similar in execution, and your character's unique abilities often go completely uncapitalized on. I had an operative that had faster download speeds and could complete said things from farther away, and on many missions it made no difference because I still had to go in person to my objective, or the objective was completable without that added bonus. There's an obvious solution to this: make certain skills and builds a requirement for missions. Have the game not let you start until a specific kind of operative is recruited, but then we run into a different issue: pacing. If we force players to start and stop over and over, having to do 20-minute side quests before each mission, then we'll make players feel like they are stuck doing busy work and jumping through hoops. This could potentially be alleviated by introducing a tutorial mission that introduces you to the different kinds of operatives, or better yet, when choosing the first 3 at the beginning of the game, ensure players start with operatives that cover a wide range of movesets, opting to be jacks of all trades, meeting the requirements to complete all objectives but not efficiently, which should then encourage players to seek out better operatives. This solution would require changing the game too much, so it's not like this really means anything, but the point remains. Despite being able to play as anyone can do everything. What further doesn't help with the gameplay is that level design is generally by the numbers. Look, I know in a lot of Ubisoft games, specifically Far Cry, a lot of the game can be outposts. Some are actually called outposts, but others are called heists or infiltrations, where you're essentially doing the same thing. Head to an area, clear it out, grab something, and that same formula is present here. The reason I consider that formula a problem here is that the mechanics are not deep or reliable enough to make that formula excusable. It's the same thing: enter a base, stay in stealth for as long as possible, get spotted, engage with the combat, and then inevitably engage with guns. Speaking of which, let's look at what that entails. Hand-to-hand combat has so much potential, and yet it's just a counter simulator. Okay, that's a little reductive. Essentially, there are 3 moves: punch, counter, and guard break. Punching is usually blocked, so you'll need to guard break, and when an enemy attacks, you can dodge and immediately counter with an attack. Simple enough. And then the takedowns when an enemy is at low health are fun, but here's the catch: the enemy AI makes fights generally repetitive. If knocked over, they will almost always get up with an attack, and of course a counter attack knocks them to their knees, so I'm sure you see the pattern. Sometimes they will block all the time. This means that even if you perform a guard break, they will still block follow-up attacks. And since guard breaks don't do much damage, the best way to beat them is to play defensively. Playing defensively would work if there was a parry button or a proper block, but there isn't, so instead we just sit there pressing the same 2-button combo over and over again. But wait, there's more. Since melee combat is the safest way to approach any encounter, you'll be doing it a lot. Why is it the safest? Well, combat is generally easier. I mean, look at this. And also, because believe it or not, the shooting is perhaps the most unreliable part of this game. Shooting in all the Watch Dogs games was just fine. It was fine in the first game and even in the second, though I never used it much there. Here, not only is recoil insane, but the guns are inaccurate even at close range, and the aim assist is so overtuned that it resulted in countless close calls. Let's talk about aim assist for a moment, because yeah, I could have used a mouse, but let's remember that these games are designed for consoles just as much as they are designed for PC. And unfortunately, when I have to use a crowbar to pry my aim away from what the game thinks I'm aiming for, it results in an unfun experience. Certain enemies can go invisible or close to it. This is never explained to you, of course, so I learned the hard way by taking a 12-gauge suppository and losing an operator forever, but fuck it, whatever. The real issue is, even when I kept an eye out and was prepared to shoot at these people, my aim would snap to the visible target and I couldn't get my aim off of them. These invisible enemies often have shotguns and will rush you, so there's no time to waste. And the best part is, you also can't hack them until they exit invisibility. So every time one of these guys shows up, I have to scramble to, the moment they were visible, jam their guns. This is just the beginning too. We could talk about how often peeking even for a second results in you being at extremely low health, meaning most fights were a cycle of fire a few shots, heal, fire more, leading to tedium for no reason. We could talk about how the guns do the bare minimum damage, especially in the later game. We can talk about how in this game where just a few bullets can take you down, the game throws tens of enemies at you that have heat-seeking bomb drones. We can talk about how sometimes when running away, an Albion drone can just say fuck it and nuke your vehicle. But what do I want to talk about the most? It's the hit detection. Watch Dogs Legion has an online mode, and we'll talk about it later. But I need to stress that the single-player campaign is strictly single-player. There are no seamless multiplayer modes, no invasions, which makes sense. That was a fun feature from the last game. Of course it can't be here. And everything that is here is offline. So why the fuck is there a delay on a shotgun? Huh? I mean, God, I'm sorry, I know I'm getting loud, but you need to understand that literally every other minute there is some bullshit here where I thought, how the fuck did anyone think this was stable enough for a permadeath mode? The one counter argument is, it's fine. I mean, in the specific clip I'm showing, I survived that encounter. But it's like, why do I need a second of uncertainty? It makes me think I missed or that there's some sort of glitch and I may need to refire, which is another issue because you can only hold so much ammo at a time. And okay, I'm sorry. We're getting too wild. You can't see me, but I'm straightening my tie, I'm slicking my hair back, and I'm recomposing myself. I know there's an obvious thing I've yet to mention, which is, if you didn't enjoy the permadeath mode and the harder difficulties, then why'd you play with it? The answer is simple. I'd rather be mad than bored. I'd rather feel something than nothing. Plus, when it works, permadeath mode raises the stakes to unbelievable levels. And the reason these issues sting so much is because when they aren't here, I was having a ton of fun. Without permadeath, I didn't feel as attached to my characters. I didn't feel as though anything posed a real danger because death was simply an inconvenience. Permadeath doesn't create these issues, it just makes them easier to see. So I think these critiques are valid even if my anger towards it is less so. To go back to the invasions and seamless multiplayer, you'll notice that there's a lot of gameplay features that just aren't present here, and I can't understand why. Mass hacks are gone. Blackouts, something a character even uses in this game, aren't here, despite it being some of the coolest parts of the other games. Well, it is here, but you need to pay for it. Thanks, Aiden. We can still control vehicles and cranes, but there's a lack of other controllable objects outside of the different classes of drones. Where are the walking robots? Where's the RC jumper? The quadcopter doesn't need to be here because the drones replace it well enough, but where's the ability to set a trap? In fact, at the end of the game, someone sets traps for us, so it's clear these mechanics are in some form here. Our newest remote tool is a spider bot, which is cool. It's a nice callback to the digital trips in Watch Dogs 1, but the hacking here somehow feels almost as bare bones as the first game. How have we regressed so far from Watch Dogs 2? I think the answer is tone. This affects the story heavily too, but the first and second games mechanically were divided by what was at the forefront. Aiden was a shooter first, hacker second. Marcus was a hacker first, shooter second. DedSec in London is somehow neither. They don't have the arsenal or focus ability to be a proper shooter, and they don't have the hacking capabilities to be a proficient hacker, and I don't understand why. Maybe it's the issue of realism. Surely a random person couldn't join DedSec and be given all these new hacks to use in the open world, except that's exactly what Claire did to Aiden. It really could be that simple. This gameplay divide, where the game tries to be part hacker flick, part spy thriller, but not being able to commit and thus properly fulfill either, is exactly why I said Watch Dogs 2 created a rift in the series, because now they had to choose, and God knows they were going to take the coward's way out. Even things that should be layups here are squandered. Boss fights? Most boss-like encounters are just waves of enemies, which by the late game is hardly surprising, if challenging. Nigel Cass is one of the few boss fights, and we have to manually move around the map solving buried light puzzles to create an EMP blast that makes him vulnerable. Then we do barely any damage, even with a fucking grenade launcher, and he goes down. Of course, there are enemies that continuously respawn, which the game never tells you, and that's part of the game's challenge. You'll often never be told how something works. You'll just have to find out for yourself. And what that usually means is losing an operator because the game decides on permadeath mode not to tell you that there are invisible enemies with shotguns that will rush you. That's an invisible gun.
Oh my, that's so hard to see.
Yeah, and granted, I feel like some of this, like, it was pretty obvious. Boom, I'm instantly critical. Like,
this is so dumb.
That's what I'm saying. What the fuck am I supposed to do with this? You know, grenader enemies, when killed, will drop a fucking grenade, and this includes stealth. You wanna know how I figured this out? By having my stealth run in a mansion with few exit points compromised by it. Are they sitting there, pin-pulled, hand on the grenade? Really? Or here's a really good one. Clan Kelly has a base I need to infiltrate. I do what I must, but on the way out, I get into a gunfight. I make a break for a car and hit the road. Albion starts getting involved, but they're not aggro on me, hence their blips on the map being white, and hence me not having a wanted level. On the way out, for the only time ever, a drone, I have to assume owned by Clan Kelly, starts approaching me. I can't turn around to hack it because flipping the camera means the game thinks I want to target the parked car instead of the drone behind me, so I just hit the gas. The other reason I do this is because, as established with the chase drones, if a drone is going to fire, they will show a red line, giving me a second to perform some evasive maneuvers. What they also usually do is fly in front of you, because the game knows the camera sucks horse dick, so when a drone flies in front, it's easier to disable. This drone instead fires a fucking bazooka that insta-kills me. And so I'm driving, I'm thinking, okay, he's gonna fucking mess up my controls a little bit. Just wait until you see what he does. Are you fucking kidding me?
Oh, you're so trash.
The point is, I feel like a majority of my deaths were either not my fault, or were the subject of things that I could never predict, or never react to in time. 4 enemies spawning instantly in an empty room, takedowns not working, enemies pulling guns for no reason, takedowns not working, this time on a character that has an ability that grants them instant takedowns. I know I harped on the combat and stealth a lot, but that's because it's all you do. What are there to say about the puzzles? Most of the time, it's guiding a spider bot through a series of vents, and sometimes there's random lasers. Ooh! The actual hacking puzzles are less complex here than they were in Watch Dogs 2, arguably less than Watch Dogs 1, so they left a lot to be desired. This too is why the play as anyone system is flawed, because all of these resources were put towards it, and they left other facets of the game malnourished, and the damn thing doesn't even work. All of their procedurally generated characters, and still, one of the story characters I was tasked with sleeping with looked nearly identical to the one I was already using. Is it funny? Sure, but it's not trying to be, so I find it hard to give the game much credit for it. But don't worry, there are plenty of times where the game is intentionally trying to be funny, and those fail too. The story of Watch Dogs Legion starts out fine enough, but it's clear literally from the first few minutes that it's doomed for one reason: tone. The tone of a story, and a game as a whole, dictates not just how scenes need to be played out, but how scenes will be interpreted. Marcus and crew could get away with their one-liners all the time because the story and tone of that game was more laid back. Did people still appreciate that tone? Not entirely, but the game was consistent. However, those who disliked the second game's tone the most were those that played the first game, where melancholic was Aiden's middle name. Everything about the game was sad, and the happiest ending anyone got was Aiden, who lost his family, his friends, was betrayed, and still had a dead niece. Sure, he felt relief after avenging her, and I think the game was so cool for actually letting revenge be the viable solution, but to say he won is a stretch. What we also saw in the first game was how overbearing this new technology could be in the wrong hands. Where Watch Dogs Legion succeeds is following the evolution of that technology. Chicago saw the introduction of that technology and what it can control: streetlights, computers, cameras, and it set up something important: data as ammunition. San Francisco saw CTOS gathering that information from the public and utilizing said data to influence society. Certain people were charged for crimes they didn't commit, denied healthcare before they applied, and we saw technology be systematically used to keep people in their place economically. The bottom stays on the bottom, and the higher-ups keep ascending. Legion looks at the actual mobilization of that idea. Now, with all the data and with all the tech, Albion can truly start controlling people in more overt ways. Microchips, drones that can kill someone from out of the sky. There will be no running. No more staying off the grid. A lot of this is told to us. In fact, given the first few minutes, our introduction is entirely told to us. Dalton, someone we're supposed to care about, is attempting to stop some bombs in Parliament, but is unsuccessful because of an organization called Zero Day that not only kills Dalton, but destroys London's DedSec, including their charismatic leader, Sabine. The setup is simple: help a surprisingly survived Sabine rebuild DedSec, find out who's responsible for Zero Day, and clear DedSec's name. The story follows a chapter structure where we get clues about who Zero Day is, like how Clan Kelly is tied to them, and then investigate Mary Kelly to figure out what her involvement was while also stopping the nefarious plans. The story gets better as it goes on, especially when the first mission sees us reconstructing some scenes in AR, which gameplay-wise is really boring. We just sit around watching stuff, and eventually this does lead to our first official chapter, but I certainly felt like the story took a while to get moving, especially when, setup-wise, its opening was strong. I was curious, who's Zero Day? And I appreciated that a lot of the NPCs were affected by these bombings, losing family members in the process. As the story goes through its different chapters, all surrounding a figure or faction, you'll notice two consistent themes. The first is that the tone is all over the place, not just thematically, but in the writing, the delivery, and the story as a whole. What this struggles in tandem with is the other consistent issue, which is that, sometimes, it works extremely well. As stated when talking about the gameplay, there are pockets of Watch Dogs Legion that made me understand Ubisoft's vision. Moments that almost make the ends justify the means, where I felt that all the sacrifices to gameplay or characters were worth it. But those moments are fleeting, and in their wake is a grim reminder of what's left. These moments make the mistake of raising the bar, showing us that the mediocrity that it's sandwiched between was not just the best they could do, it's just the best they did. Let's talk about Sky Larson, because plot-wise, it was the moment where things clicked, but it also showcases how tone can play a role in removing us from scenes. Eventually, after some investigating, we're brought to the home of Sky Larson to find her. When inside, we see that she has a house AI, and that her home is very sanitized despite being absent for the last 2 years. We've also been told by one of our connections that there's something sinister within her home. After descending an elevator, we enter a strange bunker containing a home and a garden, and the site is genuinely beautiful. There's sadly a gravestone for a dog named Ada, and yet we still hear a dog. We see some memories of Skye and her mother. Her mother had a terminal disease, and this home was a gift from Skye to her, even though she hates it. As we move through the different rooms, the home becomes more and more disturbing, the house AI becoming more distorted. Our first instinct is to follow the dog's barks, but that's not a dog. Finally, we discover that Skye was trying to convince her mother to have her conscience uploaded, but her mother would rather die a human than live on outside of her vessel. Skye didn't like that answer, and sedated her defenseless mother, uploading her to the house AI. Skye's mother didn't have eyes anymore, she couldn't see, but she could still cry, and the sobbing drove Skye to delete different parts of her mother's communicative abilities until she was left as nothing more than a slave. When we find the house, Skye's mother has one final request: unplug her and let her die in peace. This is the only way she will reveal where Skye is. This entire segment is perfect. The story being told, the implications of a neural upload, the way Skye sees her mother as an experiment, and the way she discarded her after failing to make her content with her new life. It was powerful. I've played Legion 3 times now, and every time I am deeply disturbed when the home, stringing together pre-made phrases like a spoken ransom note, begs to be released. But, as I said, this highlights tonal issues, because the first thing your character says when entering this place is this.
Oh my shitting hell. Are you seeing this?
Come on. I'm being 100% serious when I say this. Watch Dogs Legion's best moments are when it takes itself seriously, allows a shred of dignity, and when its characters shut the fuck up. It's so sad that the best moments of the game are where the story takes itself seriously, and I need to be clear. The issue isn't that there's humor here. The issue is when and how. For as much as people hated Watch Dogs 2's humor, it at least took itself seriously, and had moments where characters would show some sincerity. And look, those moments are here, and said moments are the highlights, but many of those moments are undercut because they are between scenes that are comically poor, and not because we're laughing with the game. The most stark contrast is between Bagley and Sabine. Sabine feels like she's from Watch Dogs 1. She's always gloomy, dressed in black, delivering her lines without much enthusiasm, which makes sense. She's the only surviving member of the old DedSec. She's grieving. Then, the more prominent member of DedSec, Bagley, the Jarvis-esque AI assistant to the group, is always cracking jokes and rarely delivers a line without some kind of sass. In his case, because it's so clearly part of his personality and because of his own disconnect from the situation, his humor ironically feels the most human. Bagley feels like Watch Dogs 2 all the way from the humor that was of the game's tone to the synthetic voice, drawing immediate comparisons to Wrench. Even the people you interact with, Caitlin Lau, Naut, and Hamish, are all interesting characters that take themselves seriously, but the biggest disconnect always comes from the player character. So let's bear in mind that there will always be variation to characters and their delivery due to their procedural generation. It's technically statistically possible, albeit highly improbable, that every character I gathered, which was close to 50, all had the same smug delivery. But I'm going to make a guess that all characters talk like this. What does this sound like? Well, to better understand, let's see what it looks like. In an effort to track down Caitlin Lau, we follow the trail of organ harvesters, and upon falling on top of a pile of bodies, our character scurries back in horror, a reasonable reaction. Then, the very next words out of their mouth was this.
Nice skills. How are you feeling? That guy was ready to slice you open.
You know that feeling you get where your peripheral fades away, your thoughts of the outside world drift, and your full attention is on a story because it feels like it's getting good? I felt that going into this. But this line and the subsequent conversation was so jarring, but the game could have crashed to achieve the same sense of complete immersive corrosion. This is a point I could hammer home over and over again, but for the sake of brevity, for as ironic as it seems, I'll leave it here. With each chapter there's a villain. Skye Larson, Mary Kelly, Nigel Cass, and they're all built up to be generally evil, though starting with Mary Kelly to me was a weak choice, because she is by far the weakest. The greatest problem is that Kelly is so evil that it borders on comical. She screams at her victims about bottom lines and calls them merchandise to their faces, mocking their desires to go back to their homes. It's hard to decide if it's the delivery that's wrong or if conceptually it's too evil to even comprehend. An immediate comparison is to Lucky Quinn, who I felt was much better, not just because his evil is more subdued, despite being just as pure, but also because his motivations made more sense. He trafficked humans for money, yeah, but he was also looking for power, and his other schemes made that much clearer. The whole reason he was evil was not because he enjoyed picking apart the lives of Aiden and Maurice, but because he simply didn't care. Progression throughout the story while starting small is quite good. I never felt like DedSec was just spinning their wheels. Sure, the identity of Zero Day isn't clear until the end, but following the trail of connections was engaging enough, and as we inch closer to the end, the game throws a potential candidate our way to tease us towards the big reveal. Before that happens though, we get one of our only official boss fights against Nigel Cass. I don't think the fight was all that good, especially when again there are respawning enemies, but narratively, it was fine. Cass's character as a whole was interesting enough, but again, His cartoonishly evil performance, shooting someone right in the head the moment they disagree, undermines any seemingly noble motivation. What intrigued me about Cass was that upon first introduction, he seemed to head Albion and their oppressive approach to crime because he truly cared. We learned that his father was murdered, and this sent him on an obsessive spiral, leading to Project Themis, the drones capable of stopping crimes instantly and before they happen. This system is flawed, no question, but it makes Nigel not to be a bad guy, just the wrong guy. This could have made for an interesting dynamic between DedSec and Albion. There's an argument to be made for Albion's existence too. Technology has taken over London, there are more homeless than ever with how many jobs are being automated, and with more people being desperate, there's likely more crime. Now, of course, we can't expect the government to curb economic crisis, and realistically, it's hard to motivate people to rally behind fixing the economy because economic issues don't affect enough people. The upper class don't care that minimum wage is below living wage, for example, because it really doesn't affect them. Crime, however, is something everyone hates, so it's easy to push the blame on crime, and instead of attacking the systemic reasons why people commit crimes, we just attack the criminals. Now, DedSec could act as the antagonist to this position, as they have in the past when discussing the higher patrol rates and shoot-on-sight orders police were given to the low-income neighborhoods of San Francisco. Maybe their stance here is that harshly punishing criminals won't lead to actual reform because most criminals aren't committing these crimes out of desire. They're often disadvantaged in some way and feel that the only way to make ends meet or to get ahead is to steal, kill, or do whatever else it takes. DedSec could argue that people in poverty are more likely to do these things, and thus, yes, more arrests would be made in those areas, meaning crime reports are up, thus justifying the increased police presence leading to a cycle. Then, Cass could explain that with all these drones, all neighborhoods could be monitored equally, and fuck me, I'm just writing a new story. My point with this is that even if it's a surface level argument, actually having the game talk about this stuff, hell maybe even taking a stance on it, would make the game more interesting and give it more to chew on. I mentioned that I disagree with the way DedSec wanted to handle the injustices Bloom introduced in Watch Dogs 2, but I enjoyed that story nonetheless, because the game actually had something to say. Here, I feel it hardly says much at all. In fact, the game even tells you that the group doesn't know what it wants.
We both use violence and manipulation to shape London into something better. The only difference is I know what I want it to be. Strong, stable, unified, safe. This is what I value. What about you?
To be honest, I don't know. But I'm gonna stop you anyway.
DedSec here can feel like they are fighting the power for the sake of it, and moments like this make me wonder what the fuck all of it's for. Fortunately, that question is answered quickly enough, and the answer is 0 Day. After stopping Cass, the crew gets together for a final celebration, and I really enjoyed this not just because we got to see all of our characters together, but because we see that they now have stories. When profiling our characters, we can see the exact tasks they did for DedSec, and I think that was a really nice touch, even if the party is interrupted by some unsettling information. We discover after stopping Cass, Larson, and Kelly that all the technology we were storing in the DedSec database was actually stolen by 0 Day, who has reappeared and is claiming to do a hard reset on society. 0 Day claims that all of this new technology has turned London into a generally worse place, and it's hard to argue with that part. However, their solution is to destroy that technology, killing people in the process, but benefiting the survivors. It's pretty obvious why we would oppose that, killing bad and all, but I wonder why Sabine is so confident that it's going to work. By the way, 0 Day is Sabine, fuck it. Does Sabine think she'll be able to take down the whole world's network? Does she believe that people will just forget how to make these machines again? Historically speaking, this never worked. If there's one thing I learned from my history degree, it's that London has a surprisingly lengthy history with people pissing in public. Also, when the Industrial Revolution was revolutionizing or something, there was this group of textile workers that were breaking the new machines because it took their jobs and assumedly produced things of a worse quality. The very device you're watching this video on is proof that their acts were in vain. You can't stop progress, and Sabine should have known this. We don't even need to look at history to see more examples. Think about how many grocery stores have introduced self-checkout machines. Those machines are taking away jobs from a generation that is already struggling to find one. Look at how much AI has progressed in the last 2 years alone. AI-generated songs, videos, images, it's already too late. There's so much content online that is made entirely by AI. Hell, entire channels are run by people using a fake voice, fake videos, and for as much as I won't use that in my videos because I truly believe that when it comes to content, we'll see a renaissance of videos that contain a significant human element, I can't stop that progress. It's frustrating, but there's simply nothing we can do because most of us aren't in positions to decide who is replaced and who isn't. We simply will be the ones replaced. The best we can do is to find new ways to be useful. I think, aside from the death aspect of it, Sabine is fighting for a noble cause, and one that generally aligns with DedSec already, which makes her a good villain, and remarkably, the most grounded of all the villains. This reveal, the escape, and generally the final moments of the game was another moment where Legion hit a stride. It was also where I noticed that we never need to actually utilize our team. Once the tutorial chapter is complete, assuming you've recruited a female Albion officer, which isn't that hard to find, there are no missions you cannot do. Also, you never need to utilize more than one team member at once. In this instance, when you do, it made me feel like I was actually part of a larger team, though being able to choose who the other team member was would have been nice, as the character the game selected was brutally ill-equipped for the mission. Said mission sees one person tracking down Sabine and the other heading to the servers that store Bagley, as Sabine is using the Bagley AI to destroy London. Sabine, now that the cat is out of the bag, delivers an amazing performance, and seems to be genuinely as shocked at the player's stupidity as we are. My god, our character, upon seeing 2 drones trained on them, puts their weapon down. That's fair. However, then they look at their weapon as it falls off the building and gives a reaction like, ooh, geez, that was not supposed to happen. Then, the game tries to be humorous with this scene.
Are you just incredibly stupid?
Do you want me to access the transmitter while you socialize?
Yes. Yes! You're incredibly stupid! Wonderful!
But it completely fails because, as established just seconds earlier, clearly our character is stupid. Sabine, after we turn the drones off, is left to die, and I really like that she ultimately lets go, because it shows a greater resolve in her philosophy. She doesn't care if she's around to see what she feels is a better future, so long as it happens. I have seen speculation that Sabine may have survived because we technically don't see a body, but that is a really long fall, and if she did somehow survive through landing on a cargo drone, surely our player character would have reacted instead of dropping the shittiest one-liner ever.
How's that for a hard reset?
Oh, also, they said this just before.
We're watchdogs.
Fuck me. While this is happening, we swap to a different character and shut down the Bagley servers. This was the most emotional moment in the game, and honestly, it's because Bagley was the most human character we interacted with for an extended period of time. Sabine became less and less prevalent as she went on, and never seemed to care much for if we lived or died outside of fulfilling her ulterior motive. In that regard, I suppose she performed that well. But what's worse is that, as you keep pulling out server cores, we see Bagley's mind start to deteriorate. His speech starts slurring, his language more basic, and he even starts showing signs of fear. Bagley knows he needs to do this, but he has second thoughts. Cold feet. It genuinely made me sad. For as much as the NPCs in this game were so clearly AI, having to kill Bagley felt like we were killing the only authentic human in this game. And with Bagley's death, is the end of the game. Through a classic newsfeed credit sequence, we see that to some extent, DedSec was successful. Their names have been cleared, they stopped Zero Day, and while they couldn't stop all the oppressive new technologies, they were able to at least inspire more everyday people to stand up against Albion, Bloom, and any other powers that be. It's one of the first times a Watch Dogs experience ends on a good note, but the post-credit scene shows us that Bagley is in fact still alive. The explanation is complicated, but what's important is that any emotional response from killing him not even 10 minutes earlier is completely nullified. On the bright side, I couldn't think about it that much because I realized in this instance that the weird facial hair my character had wasn't weird. It was simply his beard clipping through his jawline. Watch Dogs Legion, you never fail to entertain. Overall, I actually don't think the story fundamentally is that bad. I think a lot of the issues come from execution and the general tone. Of course, being able to play as anyone is part of the issue too, and having a central protagonist with a personality, not just a variation of tone and accent, would help me feel more connected to the world. I think the biggest offender is that tone, because even games like Watch Dogs 2 where the story isn't amazing, or hell, even the first game where I had a slew of criticisms, had consistent tone. The vibes were consistent, and I could find myself immersed in that, if nothing else. Watch Dogs Legion, at so many points, feels incapable of taking itself seriously, and for as outlandish as that ending can be, and for as much as it dives into science fiction that is otherwise unheard of in this series, they were the highlights because the game treated those moments, mostly, with respect. And this extends to the side content too. A lot of the side content here is pretty run-of-the-mill. I wouldn't call it bad, in fact, I liked it, but it doesn't stray from the game's base formula. Boxing leagues ask you to engage in melee combat, many infiltrations ask for stealth, and maybe you'll hack a few things along the way. But there's one mission that may just be my favorite mission in the game. Upon completing the story, Bagley mentions that they have started noticing gaps in their knowledge, assuming them to be some kind of memory from a past life. If we go to 8 different locations and snap a photo of a landmark, we get an audio log that tells the story of someone named Bradley. Bradley loved rowing, but couldn't do it after beginning to suffer from seizures. His sister Sky, a talented scientist, was able to cure his epilepsy, and right as Bradley was going to start his life again, he developed early onset dementia. Sky spoke to Bradley about neural mapping, and the story ends with him continuing to undergo treatment for his dementia in a hotel, as Sky didn't want any hospitals involved. It's clear that Bradley was the sister of Sky Larson, who we killed. His hotel is prepaid until the time of his death, and upon entering we can allow Bagley to talk with Bradley and explain that even though his life was cut short and is not what he wanted it to be, he still, in some way, lived on. This was a really great epilogue for the game, and confirmed exactly why Bagley was so human for an AI. It was another moment where Legion put the comedy aside and acted with sincerity, and it was probably my favorite moment in the game, especially considering how it built upon my other favorite moment, which was when we learned about Sky Larson and her mother. Maybe you're just one of the few that can't get enough of Legion though, and in that case, I have good news and bad news. The good news is, the game has 2 online modes. Bad news is, they hardly work. Let's start with online. My expectations for Watch Dogs Online was very high because GTA Online has been so good that I still play it over a decade later. I don't need the same depth of a game with 10 years under its belt, and I know GTA Online didn't start great, but still, I was hoping for a lot. The bar, however, was low. All we needed were invasions, some PvP modes, and the ability to free roam with friends. So how does the game fare? Not well. For a game so futuristic, it's awfully ironic that there is lag everywhere. If you're a passenger, you'll be sliding around the road. If trying to interact with something, you'll notice buttons are hit multiple times, sometimes not at all, and plenty of modes will have no players available. I'm sure the invasions were great here, but I wouldn't know because I couldn't connect to anyone, including the people on my friends list, that were playing at the same time. Missions consist of the usual fare, and it's not worth going deeper than that. Coordination where possible is satisfying, but when one teammate is downed, you get about 30 seconds to revive them or else you're back to the beginning of the mission, at times losing 10 minutes worth of progress. This made the levels frustrating, especially when some of those deaths weren't the player's fault, and were instead the fault of the servers. This made all of the missions extremely unfun, because we were constantly playing around with this jank that was already layered on top of the usual Legion jankiness. Walking up to an enemy, seeing the takedown button but instead meleeing them. Yeah, that's still here. But what is also still here, interestingly enough, is the ability to play as anyone. Thanks to purchasing the Season Pass, I had some prestige operatives. Operators that are not pay to win, but pay to stand a significantly greater chance. Fun. I figured for a mode like this they would let us create our own character, but instead we get research points by completing missions, and then use those points to instantly unlock new characters. This removes some of the immersion that is supposed to come from the play as anyone system, but I understand if that system is too ambitious to function in an online mode. As you play, you can also earn rewards through free battle passes on its 20th season, which was surprising to see it supported for so long. But if you need a little more variety, then you can try Legion of the Dead, a separate zombie mode that was pretty boring. I say this with all due respect, but this was just not for me. I mean, even conceptually, I couldn't care less about this. According to Ubisoft, this was a passion project for the devs, and hey, I can't hate on that, but I didn't find this very fun. It's a lot of the same stuff, except you start with worse operatives, making simple things like drones extremely challenging, and the hordes of zombies that can swarm you make any kind of traversal something you need to think about. There were some fun moments, like when running away from a massive horde only to climb onto something right in the eye of an undead storm, but otherwise, I felt disappointed by this. Your goal is to head around the map collecting supplies and then exfiltrating, and this loop could be great for the people that love Legion, but given that this whole mode is built upon the mechanical foundations for Legion that I already don't like, and then also have server issues, I was happy to not put much time into this. You know, I kept hammering on about this idea that Legion is at its best when it sticks to a consistent tone and takes itself seriously, and whenever I vented my frustrations with this story, I would be told over and over that you just have to play Bloodline. Story sucked? Play Bloodline. Don't like not having a central character? Play Bloodline. Want a proper sequel to the stories and characters you love? Play Bloodline. Well, that's certainly a lot for a single DLC to live up to, but to my surprise, those people were right. Bloodline, more than anything, was a glimpse into an alternate future. A different Watch Dogs, one not bogged down by overambitious gimmicks or too afraid of its own setting to take itself seriously. Bloodline is exactly what Watch Dogs Legion could have been, and who knows, maybe it's what the series could be moving forward. I need to preface this discussion by saying that while I am going to praise a lot about Bloodline, it is still a story built upon the foundation of Watch Dogs Legion, so it can only be as good as that foundation allows it to be. I still had moments of frustration where an enemy teleports in front of me, but I was more likely to excuse that because 1, I wasn't playing on permadeath, so death wasn't a big deal, and 2, the rest of the DLC was good enough for said good things to outweigh the bad. Sure, there are still problems here, but what this DLC also shows is that Ubisoft still has it in them. After playing Legion, I thought, had Ubisoft forgotten what Watch Dogs seemed to be all about? Have they forgotten what the series' strengths were? Is it even possible to bring the series back from certain doom? This is their answer, and it's a good one. Unlike the base game, Bloodline stars an actual protagonist, Aiden Pierce, who, in Chicago, don't look at the environment, okay, trust me, this is definitely not London. He gets a job from none other than Jordy, who tells him that there's a high-paying gig in London. Since that's where Jackson lives now, Aiden thinks he can not only get enough money to retire, but to reconnect with Jax. All he has to do is sneak into a place called Brokatech and steal something called the Broka Bridge. As this job is nearly complete, it seems the tech is stolen by none other than Wrench. After giving chase and being captured, the head of Brokatech, Rempart, assumes Aiden to be working with Wrench, and threatens Jackson. Aiden eventually strikes a deal where he will bring the tech so long as Jackson isn't hurt, and our manhunt begins. Immediately, this DLC has reasonable stakes, and utilizes our previous connections to characters to make those stakes high. It's not simply the fate of a group of randos, it's the fate of a character we already care about. Further, we get an excuse to hear from Jackson, who was previously mute during the events of the first game. He does eventually speak near the end of Aiden's story, but now is having full conversations with him. We get to see the effects Lena's death had on Jackson, and what it was like seeing your uncle slaughter people in the name of protecting people that never wanted that protection in the first place. It was nice seeing how this sentiment turned Jackson into someone who wanted to be able to protect himself whenever possible. Once Aiden catches up with Wrench, we find out that Wrench and Rampart were developing the Broka Bridge together, but Rampart cut Wrench out at the last minute, so while Wrench wants to help Aiden, he can't exactly hand over the device, as it can be used to pilot military robots remotely. When Aiden tracks Wrench down, he gets the Broka Bridge and brings it to Rampart, releasing a now captured Jackson in the process. It's then revealed that it's actually a decoy. In the ensuing battle, Aiden is shot and slips into a coma, and thanks to the help of an eavesdropping Sky Larson, we learn that the only way to wake him up is to use the Broka Bridge to enter his mind. Once waking up, the crew leaves and Wrench hunts down Rampart to get revenge, though spares him after heeding Aiden's advice. For as much as the story is short, only a few hours, it moves very quickly and is complicated enough for this DLC to feel like a proper expansion. There were no moments that stood out to me as time wasted, especially when compared to Legion's main story, which felt like one sidetrack after another while trying to deduce who Zero Day was. The other strength of the story, and I know I've said this word 21 times by now, is tone. Tonally, I figured Legion could have gone in the direction of either Doom and Gloom of Chicago or the upbeat sunshine of San Francisco. It's clear their decision for the base game was to blend the two into a whole new identity that I hated. This time, they made a marriage between the two, with Aiden and Wrench operating at completely different sides, and Jackson acting as a mediator between the two, making sure one mood or vibe doesn't overpower the other. This split is helped by playing as the two characters, and while most of the game is playing as Aiden, I think that makes sense given that while both characters are likable, Aiden actually has unfinished business I believe players wanted to see. I wish we saw this approach in the main game, and I truly believe it would have resulted in a far better story. That doesn't mean there aren't problems here. Wrench has a lot of unfinished business that is alluded to the point where I wonder why so much of it was left to audio logs. Essentially, he had a boyfriend, had a falling out, and due to the stress, has regressed back into the Wrench persona after eventually being comfortable enough to live life outside of it after the events of Watch Dogs 2. Throughout the ending moments, Aiden tries to convince Wrench that revenge isn't the only way to go. And that is noble and all, but I wish the game explored more how this ideology shifted. I don't know if sparing Maurice is canon, though I do believe it is, but what we do know is that Aiden felt better after taking down Quinn. Now, obviously that relief is temporary, but having the game explore what made him realize this was, and how that led to his newer mindset would have been nice. The biggest connection we have is within his mind. The moments moving through Aiden's mind were absolutely brilliant. Seeing how the ghosts of his past literally haunt him, and seeing a visual representation of what that was like was excellent. Burying his Fox persona was a nice touch, and a central theme. Aiden's getting older, he can't take a bullet like he used to, and so him looking for an exit strategy makes sense. I would have liked to hear from Nikki, but I wonder at what point we're asking for too much from a relatively small DLC. Keep in mind, it isn't simply an Aiden story, but a Wrench story too, and they both have their own side missions to stifle their lore. Bloodline still wants to emphasize the people of London, and they do so in a few ways. For one, due to not being able to recruit anyone, everyone is now brought back down to the same level of being people, and feeling more like people, because they now have easily accessible dirty secrets. One doctor I looked at had a weird feeling that they never got checked out, and again, these details mean nothing, but that mundanity is what makes it so intriguing. Of course, this information was available in the base game, but you had to access a whole other menu for it, which defeats the idea of having that information at a glance. But to keep connected with the people, Aiden and Wrench obtain their respective upgrades through helping the different people of London, or more accurately, the different members of DedSec. These missions were generally fine, much like the side quests in the base game, though putting upgrades behind these was a wise idea, as I would much rather engage in actual stories than run around the map grinding tech points. Where the later side quests succeeded most is in bringing back fan favorites. Jordy makes a phone appearance during the campaign and in a few side quests for Wrench. Wrench doesn't have as many side operations as Aiden, but his were far more fun, seeing us in a hackathon, blowing shit up, and generally doing things we never did anywhere else in London. But then, once all the others are finished, you get a call from an old friend. I wish we could have seen him in person, but at least hearing from Marcus and knowing that he and Wrench are still tight was really nice. Maybe it's the nostalgia, after all Watch Dogs 2 was a long time ago now, but this was by far my favorite mission because of the chemistry between Wrench and Marcus that hasn't skipped a beat, and because the mission design was abundantly fun and goofy. It's clear Ubisoft still has that Watch Dogs 2 vibe within them, and this mission is a perfect display. So yeah, people were right. Where Watch Dogs Legion had brief 20-minute windows of a fun time, Bloodline was the opposite. It almost made me more disappointed with the base game because this was a glimpse into what could have been. A game with more consistency, a game with more fun, and a game with more heart. Ironically, given how minimal the procedurally generated aspects of Legions are here, this DLC overall feels more human. Because it was so human, I was able to appreciate parts of the game like never before. And I love this DLC, for as bittersweet as it feels to say. So, that's what they did. Ubisoft found themselves stuck between two fan bases, two completely different games, part of the same series, and their solution was to blend them together, attempting to satisfy both sides. However, on top of this already insurmountable task, Watch Dogs Legion attempted to create a mechanic that would revolutionize the series, making this one of the most ambitious Ubisoft games in recent memory. But I think simply, Ubisoft bit off more than they could chew, and their efforts to sacrifice everything to make playing as anyone work was in vain, and resulted in a game that feels barely anything more than a gimmick. Even if you're interested in the story, you probably don't care about the characters, and if you do, they probably die from the shoddy shooting, the shitty stealth, or the abundance of bugs that led to, at times, permanent death. I actually have one final point to drive home about this, which is that a majority of my deaths in this game were, reasonably speaking, not my fault. This is a bold statement, so we're going to quickly go through all 19 deaths to prove it. Is this going to take a few minutes? Yeah, but the video's over an hour long, the Brevity ship has sailed across the fucking Atlantic at this point, so quickly, before we start, I want to clarify that yes, in some of these scenarios, there are ways to escape, but these options were either not available, or the glitch that caused the death is so egregious that it's unreasonable to expect me to be prepared for it. Okay? Let's go. Starting with Shu 3 Saleh, who died because I found out the hard way that a bullet to the head does not in fact kill someone. Cool. Debatable on whose fault it is. Dia Agarwal, death by turret, my fault. Kelly Watson, God, I don't even know where to start, not my fault. Baravi Bajwa, arrested because I was stuck in a chair while spawning in, and an Albion guard thought it'd be cool to beat the shit out of me, not my fault. Caitlin Francis, death by gun, my fault. Katie Toth, after running from Clan Kelly despite running so far that they were blocks away and were off the minimap, they knew my exact location and closed in on me, not my fault. George Juma, fell into a bunch of guns because I couldn't clear an easy gap, shorter than other gaps we've cleared. Not my fault. Sarah Lynch, death by lack of preparation, my fault. Dilapan Saleshi, death by botched stealth, my fault. Quinn McDonald, chase gone wrong, a bit shitty as I hacked the car instead of the person behind them, but I'm comfortable saying I missed, and that is my fault. Amal Nadar, death by guns but I didn't use one so I was unprepared, not my fault. Olusola Bala, death by stairs breaking my abilities, not my fault. Irene Kobayashi, learned the hard way about invisible enemies, not my fault. Lawrence Welsh, death by the takedown sign not meaning takedown, not my fault. Catriona Murray, death by the only fucking bazooka in the game, not my fault. Arivanda Nadar, death by guns, this one stung and it was definitely my fault. Baravi Bajwa, death by the same thing, my fault. Mary Scatliff, okay, it was a hard mission, alright? My fault. Finally, Zachariah Cooper, death by overwhelming force. My fault. Now, if you've been keeping count, that's 9 deaths I consider my fault, and 10 that I consider the game's fault. If we want to be charitable and say the first death was my fault, that is still nearly half of all deaths being something I could not avoid within reason, and most were because there were specific mechanics taught to the player, rules set by the game, that were broken. Permadeath or not, that is unacceptable, especially years later with time to patch things up. Again, when things work, the game is fun, but these bugs, the ones I listed were only the ones that caused death, are so horrendous that it brought down the experience as a whole. Watch Dogs Legion has a central gimmick that isn't worth the sacrifices to the rest of the product. A story that is just fine, gameplay that is a fight against the game as much as it is against the enemies, and the overall experience is one of the rare times I think a game is flat out bad. I can't even remember the last time I ended any kind of video with the sentiment that a game is bad, but I seriously feel as though I would be lying if I said the overall experience was even fine. Bloodline is a saving grace, but it's not enough. I think this is one of the worst Ubisoft games I have played. I joke a lot about Ubisoft making quote-unquote bad games, and that's a joke because generally, I like almost all Ubisoft games. Even the ones I don't, I can appreciate what it does well, or at least enough to get over whatever gripes I have. I could not do that here. It's brutal. I was so excited for Legion. I loved the first game, I loved the second game even more, and I genuinely thought there was no way the next entry would somehow be worse. They took away features, minimized the hacking, left the mechanics unpolished, and I simply don't know how that happens. If you like Legion, please don't let this video deter you. I have no authority over this shit. I'm just some baldy with a microphone, and I certainly don't think your taste is inferior or whatever most of the jackasses on this website say when you disagree with them. I know this game has its fans, and that's good because it means the game isn't for nothing. Someone enjoyed it. If no one liked it, literally no one, then I think it was bad and a waste of effort. These days, a game like this that receives wide negative feedback poses a genuine risk of ending the series. Is this the end of the Watch Dogs series? Was this game enough to kill it? I hope not. I think Legion was a product of the two different games that the series started with. But at least now, if the series were to get another entry, Ubisoft would have Legion as a blueprint and a lesson in what not to do. You can't please everyone, and if you try too hard to do so, you might just please no one. My hopes? Something completely different. The reason I love Watch Dogs 1 and 2 is that while they are clearly in the same universe, have similar mechanics, and are both about hacking, their approach to those things are so entirely unique to that location, and the protagonists come from different backgrounds. Marcus is a hacker who specializes in it, using it as a means to fight the power. Aiden uses those same skills as a means to an end with his mercenary work, and to find his own peace. Who's to say the next character has to be either? What's stopping them from making a noir-esque New York Watch Dogs that stars a detective utilizing the intense surveillance to solve a murder that, upon digging deeper, reveals a massive internal conspiracy? Maybe we get a game set in a winter Berlin, where the weather is always extreme, be that heavy winds, blizzards, or torrential downpours. Have it star one of the many within the lower class struggling to survive in these conditions, and have them uncover how Bloom has had a hand in controlling that weather and trying to stop it. These are off the top of my head, but the point is, we don't need to follow an archetype, and if there's one thing Watch Dogs has going for it moving forward, it's that there is no formula. Each game has been so different for better or worse, and that's something we can lean into. At the end of the day though, I'm still left disappointed. I thought talking through my feelings would make me feel at peace with the game, but honestly, I'm still upset. I just wish we could have gotten more. But as is always the case with series like these, the bad ones become easier to love once they're buried by quality sequels. If we get another 2 great Watch Dogs games, then Legion will just be a weird experiment in retrospect. Ubisoft, if you're watching, then 1, sorry, and 2, I think there's still fans of the series who want more, and a future where Legion isn't the end is a future I look forward to. Hi everyone, thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, even though it is weirdly one of the most negative videos I think I've ever put out. And I have unfortunate news, which is that the next video is not going to get any more positive. Yeah, I don't know what it was, but Watch Dogs Legion, as much as I love Ubisoft games, and generally I like all video games, it's hard for me to find a game that I don't like. It fucking found something for me to not like. A lot of things for me to not like, actually. So yeah, I hope I didn't sound like too much of an incessant bitch this video, but I did have fun making it. Actually, that's a lie. I thought this video was really, really bad until I just finished watching back the final pass-through, and then I was like, okay, wait, maybe I cooked a little bit. So yeah, I hope it was good enough for you. Thank you for a good year in 2024. The channel did surprisingly well given how much I experimented. And that did lead to a lot of videos that, you know, didn't do that great. But it also led to some videos that did fantastic, like Borderlands 2. I never expected a video like that to do well. Far Cry 3 and 4. I mean, I could have guessed that might have done well, but I wasn't sure about it. And so it was nice to see videos like that do well. So thank you. And thank you, of course, to our Patreon supporters who are always appreciated around here. Your names are going to be on screen, and these people saw this video multiple days early. So if you want to be like that, and you want to be cool, you want to be fun, okay, you're still fun even if you don't support the Patreon, but if you want to be like, you know, a little bit more fun, that's where the fun takes place, buddy. I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about, I'm sorry. Normally I have more to say in these, but I don't. I'll be honest, I just want to never think about Watch Dogs Legion ever again. I'm fucking tired of it, okay? I hate this game, I hate what it did to me, and I've just had to spend the last like 3-4 weeks working on this fucking video, engrossed in nothing but negativity. So I'm gonna turn off the microphone, I'm gonna get a soda, and I'm gonna play Balatro until I fall asleep. Have an excellent day, and hopefully the next time I see you, I'm not so unbelievably pissed off at whatever game I'm covering. Okay, love you guys. Bye.